this time, I'm losing my mind.
Yeah, you can't front on that. Yeah, you can't front on that.
YOLO, mofos. Welcome to 420 TV. And hopefully, my mic's set up right this time. It appears to be. I see the little light indicating I'm here. So, YOLO, mofos, what's going on in the chat room? I was seeing everybody in there saying that they're hi. Oh, excuse me. Hi, y'all. Grand solar minimum for reals has no wrench. We're going to have to fix that immediately. Because this is a free speech zone. You want the effing truth, and I do a great job. Well, thank you very much. Actually, you could barely say anything on the platforms. It is truly the 1984 world where everywhere they're looking at you, inspecting you, and checking on you, and making sure you're doing what they view. It's not really the right thing, but what they told you to do. Do it because we said so. In tonight's episode, I think we could call it There Will Be No More Whistleblowers, because we're going to talk a little bit about what happens when you're a whistleblower or some kind of investigative journalist. Nice haircut. Actually, I'm lacking a haircut. Usually I have cut my hair by Thursday. Watch my mouth. Well, I do kind of on the screen there. Got them old teeth up in there. Anyway, we're waiting on David Dubine to call for the mini Ice Age conversations. And I'll just go ahead and put this. Nope, wrong one. Here we go. We're in action.
I do this podcast, the radio program, because we need to begin conversations on how to adapt our food growing strategies long before 2030 as agricultural zones shift, affecting global crop output. But very few mainstream media outlets are talking about the most important issue of our time: cold weather losses. Our sun is going through a 400-year cycle, which has effects on our weather patterns as our magnetosphere weakens and the jet streams go out of flow. It's not CO2, it's not you, it's the sun. Are you ready to thrive in the grand solar minimum? Then join me for mini Ice Age conversations. I'm your host, David Dubine, creator of the Adapt 2030 Mini Ice Age 2015 to 2035 video series. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Deep in the heart of our planet or above our planet, off-world, welcome to everybody. What a strange difference 7 days has made to the workings in the cogs of narratives across the planet. So much for global warming. I would have seen one article come out talking about the power disruption. Okay. But 6 or 7 articles saying that power grids are about to go down and they need helicopters to spray like they do on aircraft wings across the blades for the wind turbines. Solar panels covered in so much snow that they have to now turn back on the coal burning power plants and then reroute power because people are going to freeze to death in their homes if they don't. And wow, that'll just fit so well in the narrative where we need to go to zero emissions. Bitcoin striking up toward 50,000. I think it's around 48,000 something, 500 right now as we speak. It'll probably be over 50 by the time we have a next radio program. But I'd sent a fair few different articles over for Ransom tonight, 420 TV. Ransom Godwin here, my co-host. The narratives seem to be crumbling everywhere you look across the planet. If it's from the number of COVID related, this, that, and the other, wear 16 masks, wear 2 masks. Don't travel here, don't travel there. You can travel over there. It's okay there. Hey, it doesn't. To this whole, so cold in the southern hemisphere right now that birds are freezing to death in West Australia. And then this massive cold that's about to sweep into the U.S. And just a quick forecast for any of you in the U.S., it's going to be about 35 to 40 degrees Fahrenheit below normal temperatures all through the Midwest, way down to Mexico and clear over, deep into the east part of the U.S. Not normal, but the narrative continues. Also, have you seen the news that Project Veritas was suspended off Twitter? There's this new rule that says you're not allowed to release private information. This is a new way to stop whistleblowers. So we're going to talk about a few things tonight. And Ransom, I hear you giggling in the back, and you know how it is. It just, there's more control and more control. And the colder it gets, the less food we're going to be able to grow reliably. The more governments are going to clamp down because they're going to try to control the masses before they get unruly. And that's a kind word. Because the lack of food and the food price increases. So you can see the lockdowns are going to come first to control people's access to food because of this same cold and this grand solar minimum on these multi-thousand-year cycle we're slipping back into. And you can already see it so clearly out in front of you. It's almost like, hey, there's a, I'm scuba diving in 200-foot visibility water there, and I'm just watching everything play out right in front of me in the Red Sea. It's awesome. So Ransom, welcome tonight, man. How do you think the world's spun in the last 7 days? Taking a lot of real strange turns, I do believe.
I think so, but they're strange turns that we kind of predicted. It's so weird to just see everything you predicted just come right out in the open and start happening. I did a 420 TV news this morning, and the main subject there was food price increase, food shortages all across the board, all around the world, everywhere. Crop losses. The insurance companies aren't paying out on the losses, so farmers are going broke. They're going to be losing their farms due to not working because of COVID, or their workers couldn't show up because of the COVID. It's just on and on and on. It's rainfall, flooding, freezing, fires, and pandemic, all leading up to the same thing, which is no food on the shelves. And what little bit of food will be there will cost you an arm and a leg, literally. And yeah, you sent over. It's funny that you sent over the thing about O'Keefe, because I was literally reading it when you sent it over there, and that is exactly how there will be no more whistleblowers in the future, because they're going to consider any kind of investigative journalism, or, you know, truthers, or the whole thing is they're going after the whole idea of fighting back on any level of information or reality they're telling you, from, you know, wearing a mask all the way up to what they tell you is going on in space, and we'll get into that in a minute. It's just a massive push for a change of reality, the Great Reset. The only problem is that they're making up fairy tales for us to believe, so that we're preparing for all the wrong things. You should be preparing for your family having enough supplies to fix things, maintain things, have water, have food. And I'm not talking about for a decade, I'm talking about for hundreds of years, because there's like a math formula. I was talking about it this morning. It's not just the storable foods that you need, but you got to estimate how many years you're going to live, how many years that you may have hard times where you don't get any other, you know, resources other than what you've saved. So years may be thin, you maybe eat more, and then you got to factor in everybody's lifespan to your children, and then count that up. And we're talking about like 300 or 400 years worth of food for just a small family. And that's just, you know, covering your butt, where you have everybody has a few mouthfuls in the morning, in the afternoon, and in the evening. And believe me, if you think you're going to be doing all kinds of stuff without proteins, nutrients, and calories, you have another thing coming. And unfortunately, this whole food crisis resembles what they do to a country before they invade it. So you got to ask yourself, why is the whole world going to deal with lack of nutrition, food shortages, and outrageous prices on the food there, if the whole entire world is not being invaded by some kind of force? And I say that force is a technocratic communist world government, and it's here at your doorstep. Happy birthday.
Well, more like Happy New Year, because it is Chinese New Year. And by the way, it is the year of the metal ox. And you know that saying, bull in a china shop?
Yeah.
Well, that's pretty much the energy that rules the ox year. But with metal, it's even, you know, it's a conductor of electricity, and it's even more sharp. And there's a lot. The metal ox year is a bull in a china shop on an electrical current, basically. So depending on how your sign mixes with that, you know, a goat or something, another horse, whatever, those other farm animals, they butt heads with the ox. The rat jumps on tops and rides the ox. You know, but it is Chinese New Year tonight, so think about that, and then go back to the festivities. And you know, you just mentioned something. You know, you can feed yourself and eat a couple mouthful of food, but think about the holidays that we've so much taken for granted. Now it's just a marketing scheme. Those holidays really meant something back in the day. And when I say back in the day, I'm only talking 100 years ago and prior to that. They saved up their entire year's stocks for when they knew the spring was coming back, so they could gorge themselves as much as they could to try to put the extra nutrients in to survive the rest of the winter. This is kind of thing that we have lost the sacred reverence for the food in the holiday season. And since it is Chinese New Year tonight and everybody across Asia is gorging themselves, we should also think about, you know, Christmas and New Year's when we come up, and that hundreds of years of food, it's not like you're going to store hundreds of years of food. You're going to have to learn how to grow it, bring those vegetables or whatnot, pumpkins, anything, to seed, and then continue the second, third generation, sculpt your wild forest so you can walk through and grab and understand what the wild foraging possibilities are around your area, like the Native American Indians did. That's how you're going to survive. And you're going to need people to do it in a community of people you can trust. People are going to freak out. I know there's going to be nervous breakdowns, but do the best you can with the people around you.
It's getting cold outside.
Baby, it's cold outside.
But, you know, I have to argue with you just a little bit about a topic here. because I know you're not a fan of the global warming idea. However, I want to show you guys this article right here, which proves that global warming is a threat, and it's a threat to you and me. No, just joking. This article's ridiculous. It's about 100-car pileup in Texas, leaving 8 dead, maybe 6 dead. There's conflicting reports of what happened there, but it's 100-car pileup because of icy roads in Texas. 6 dead, I-35 in Fort Worth. So all kinds of people were, mashed up in this accident. And they're trying to say, like always, because the weather is getting colder, that proves that global warming is here to stay. Because global warming morphed into climate change because their narrative fell apart about the planet warming. So now we're in, cooling times. And I think they would have to admit that since at least 2015, even before that, maybe 2000, the overall temperature has been going down and the poles have been gathering more and more ice just in different places. So they're cherry picking what they want to tell you to fit the narrative of global warming. But I was kind of being sarcastic about that. Obviously, cold is causing all kinds of damage everywhere. And you were just talking about the weather's about to change and get even colder and push further down south, which is kind of odd. And I was talking about this morning how, like, I don't know how far back you can remember, and there's always been freezes in Florida that's messed up the oranges. It just wasn't so often that, like in the past couple decades, I mean, think about it. How many times did you see an article saying that, well, it froze, freakish cold weather's messed up the oranges and all the other citrus in Florida, and the iguanas are falling out of the trees and yada, 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 which is also a funny thing because they talk about the number of food pantries and other resources are dwindling in Florida, but at the same time they have, python constrictors and other invasive species of snake and a bunch of iguana that they could be, I'm not saying to go out and hunt them and eat them, but I have a Puerto Rican brother that evidently chases them down, skins them, and throws them right on the barbecue grill and says they are quite delicious. So maybe people might start looking for protein in new areas they never thought they would before. But believe me, Pleistocene men of different kinds were eating all kinds of animals and finding new nooks in the environment to eat. So what do we do if things get so cold that you just really can't grow outside? And I think you talk about a lot, which is you're going to have to resort to indoor growing.
Yeah, it's a terrible thing with that pileup, But I wonder how many of those deaths will be blamed on COVID.
Yeah.
No, I'm not laughing at that either. But look, because they always put people who died in motorcycle accidents and stuff as having COVID, and then it adds to the numbers. And it's such a bizarre thing going on, the way the narrative is being pushed, where we are coming into a real food insecure time. And for those of you that follow my work on Adapt 2030, you know that from this year forward, with these planets lining up into this second magnetic field out in the outer solar system, the weather's going to get more bizarre. Each seasonal change. So you can already see it down in the southern hemisphere. It's so cold down there, birds are freezing to death in Western Australia. So they're going into the winter as we're coming into the spring up here. Now in East Tennessee today, we had lightning and thunderstorms already. Now, I understand that's preceding that massive front that's coming down. But still, to get lightning and thunderstorms, what is it, like the 10th or 11th of February? A little bit early, just a little bit, like a month. But the Great White Rain, for those of you, the Seminole Indian, they used to talk about this. And this is circa 1600, 1500, Ponce de Leon kind of, if you believe the Ponce de Leon myths and legends of struggling through Florida looking for the Fountain of Youth and whatnot. That time frame. 1600s and prior, 1500s, 1400s. Seminole Indians termed this thing called the Great White Rain, Maunder minimum, when it would snow in the Everglades and it would snow in Florida. And, there were even accounts of it froze solid water down in Cuba. So we know it does get colder down that way. And those iguana, they are delicious, and you should hunt them because they're an invasive species. And along with those pythons, they're an invasive species as well. Those eggs that are in the python, if you can get them before they lay the eggs, super delicious to cook those up. But what kind of food sources are we going to do? Because, to understand you are not going to be able to grow enough to even feed one person in your house. And I've come to the realization trying to do grow trays. Yeah, you can grow enough to keep yourself lightheaded and alive. You know, when you get real hungry and you get kind of lightheaded and whatnot, you could stay at that level of growing your own food in your house, unless you get super high tech and you got a setup that I haven't seen except some commercial things in Singapore or maybe some, NASA setup. Otherwise, growing inside to have enough food for yourself in like a 1,200 square foot house is not going to be a realistic thing, especially if you have 2 kids and a wife, and you got 4 people in there. You're going to have to consider adding extra space to the outside of your house, and ringing around your house with greenhouses or whatever, something like this. Now, I may say very rudimentary kind, just putting up some extra 2x4s and then covering that with 6 mil poly so you can get an extra grow space outside. We're coming into some real challenges right now. I mean, significant society reset challenges. And you see everything marching forward from the Great Reset financially. This whole article I wanted to talk about too, the International Monetary Fund. Okay, this is the IMF. This is the central bank to the central banks. And then the Bank of International Settlements, or Bank of International Settlements, excuse me, is one step above the IMF. The IMF is a client of the BIS. The BIS is the settlement bank for all central banks across the planet, and all these international organizations with monetary, fiduciary, I guess, responsibilities also reports to the IMF, and there's that chain of command up the monetary ladder. So the IMF is so far removed from you and I, it's like 16 steps up above your regular bank that you would walk to in your neighborhood. But here's this headline, caught me off guard. I knew something was very strange about this. And Ransom, I want to get your ideas here. The IMF wants to use digital footprint of all customers' online activities to assess credit worthiness. You and I. Now, what does the IMF have something to do with you and I? Except they're going to be setting up the social credit score on a global thing, just as you talked about the global technocracy and communism moving in. The International Monetary Fund moving in to try to get a digital footprint of individuals. When they are so far above even the government level, governments come begging to the IMF. That's how far above they are. And they want to track you and I to see our credit worthiness. Where's the disconnect there, Ransom? I don't get it unless they're going to try to unveil a full-on global dystopian technocratic / I don't know what you would even term that, where they're going to bring us in on the social credit score. Transhumanist, of course, they're going to try to augment you with tech. If you don't what they say, if you look at the wrong website, if you tell something that you're not supposed to, like Twitter, then I think you're going to go in that downward spiral here like China does. Why do you think the IMF's looking to try to track everybody on the planet to see if they're going to be credit worthy? That means that they're moving to a new system then. Because the old system works fine with your credit worthiness right now, the way you're tracked, you pay your bills on time, do you have a job, X, Y, Z, whatever, to get a loan. So whatever's happening now, this seems to be, it's the old system is gone because they're moving to an entirely new system if they're going to track everybody on the planet at that above governmental level, on the global level.
Yeah, this is a pretty crazy article, but they worded it I agree with what they say right here. It says the IMF wants to use digital footprints of customers' online activities, which basically amounts to social credit scoring, finding out what your likes, dislikes, who you, what your opinions are, what kind of lifestyle you live. Are you a hunter? Are you a farmer? Are you both? So they want to see your online activities to assess your credit worthiness, meaning that if they don't like your behavior, they will cut off your credit. So if you're a farmer, you're not going to be going and using your credit cards down to buy a bunch of grain and fix your tractor or any of that stuff. And then right here, this is worded perfectly, talking about people warned for a long time in which a system of government controls every aspect of the citizens' lives. Every citizen would have to rely entirely on government to survive in the system. And what is that system? Well, it's complete control of every kind of currency that there is, which means that they control every aspect of your life, because you can't do anything without some kind of monetary value unless you create and make every single thing yourself. And I was talking about this morning, we're going to have to form our own, circles of people that trade things like colloidal silver, food, etc., products that we're making, leather people make, whatever it is. But you know that the government is going to want a piece of that pie like they always have. And the IRS is just, like you said, one step down from the International Monetary Fund, which, by the way, wants to change over the entire world's monetary system into a cryptocurrency, not unlike Bitcoin, except for they control it. And I'm showing everybody this article right here, Bitcoin to come to America's oldest bank, BNY Mellon. So the custody banks plan to eventually treat digital currencies like any other asset. And it's showing you right there that the banks and the International Monetary Fund is, because when we talk about communism and the Illuminati or whatever name you want to give to a world government, it always goes back to the central banks and the bankers, because they make the money. They don't need money. They control you with the money, and you need the money. So this is just one more step to show you that, as I was saying this morning, I think it's going to come down to the central banks using things like your health and you being a dangerous person, as far as your political views, or maybe because you're not vaccinated or whatever the case may be. So now you're not going to be able to rent a hotel room. You're not going to be able to get a taxi cab. You're not going to be able to ride on the train, the airplane. You won't be able to do anything. And soon you won't even be able to get a driver's license. And I'm going to tell you why, because you won't be able to enter a government building without your papers. Papers, please. They want to see your papers or your digital equivalent of papers, which is, some could argue the mark of the beast. I'm not that religious myself. However, it's hard to argue that the technocratic system of international banking and this communist style takeover of all of the industries is not a beast of a man-made creation, but it's still a beast nonetheless. And that article shows you right there that they are wanting to go down to the microscopic level, meaning just you as an individual, to find out how they can control your spending. And they're going to do that based on your compliance to their, orders in society, like, wear a mask or get a vaccine. You're not going to be able to get a driver's license. You're not going to be able to do any of this stuff. And this shows you, even with this Bitcoin article right here, that the governments have found a way to take over Bitcoin. So I imagine Bitcoin's going to make quite a bit more money for the, short term, but then it's going to bust because it's going to be taken over and made illegal. It's going to be the concept of having a private currency will become illegal in this new world style banking. And you can see that it's a world style banker control by who tells us what they're going to do. Like, you've heard one of the directors at WHO talking about how they're going to have to go into people's homes and get people that may be sick and take them and quarantine them. And then, if you're not doing your part to fight the planet, you may also have problems doing any kind of commerce or travel or anything. You may become, listed on lists, like you don't believe in this, so you're a denier. Say you have a different theory on something. We're in such a crazy world that every single opinion and thought that you have is now under the microscope. And they're going to treat your life, meaning your ability to get food, pursue happiness, do commerce, all of that's going to depend on your compliance with this new technocratic society. And that IMF article right there almost says exactly that. And that's what that means, is they're going to control every aspect of your life because they're watching you and they're spying on you and they're collecting data on you. And they have these learning machines and algorithms that know what you're going to do to a certain degree and can predict your behavior just from your internet searches.
Yeah, and I want to continue on the thought process of that in the granular tracking here, because they even talk about, well, what about those people who don't have the credit to get a credit card? Well, they have a lack of tracking them on their purchases. So they want to make sure everybody is in the system so they can track everybody, because there's a certain segment of population that's not tracked right now. And then also, I love this last paragraph here where it says fintech revolves around this dilemma because they're not able to tap non-financial data. And here's the craziest thing. Even in the very last sentence, it talks about in rural areas, informal workers in rural areas. So this is where they want to go and get this information, because they already pointed out where the areas that are not being gleaned and harvested of data, rural areas, informal workers like gig workers, I guess, and then those who don't have credit cards. So they're already pointing out these three areas that need to be reined in. And then the last thing here, the browser that you use can flag your score too. They want you to use Chrome. They don't want you to use Brave. And they list both of those browsers right in that paragraph. I mean, how in your face is it? If you use Brave, you're a threat because you're concerned about privacy.
Don't be brave.
Mm.
I mean,
You can see, but the way that they targeted rural areas, see, that's where the microscope focus is going, the rural areas.
yeah.
I don't know how much of this plan can really work because, you know, the rural areas are the places that grow food. So what if one day it came out and, you know, a lot of food's produced on smallholder farms, 5 acres or less. I mean, yeah, we have a lot of, you know, Monsanto agribusiness, but those areas are going offline because of this grand solar minimum. So my personal feeling is the focus of agriculture moving forward is going to be on small landholder plots of 10 acres or less. So if it comes down to the push to the shove, where they're going to starve you out like they did in the Bolshevik Revolution, what they did in the Ukraine, this is 1920s, and everybody knows they're going to die anyway. I would just stop growing food and let them starve to death too. Because if it comes down to small landholders growing all the food predominantly because the big agribusiness is going to be offline, then they can't have that many people come in and farm all the farms. If all the farmers just have a silent protest and go, nope, we're not going to grow any food. Because I heard this is what the Indian farmers are going to do. They're going to grow enough for their families, and that's it. They're going to starve their nation out on purpose. And reading through a lot of these posts that I've been reading, because I'm so fascinated by what's happening in India, because it's going to be happening here. America will be the 2.0 of India right now, because what's happening with the farm policies and the food pricing and this kind of thing, it's going to happen in the States when we revert over to these smaller landholders, when the big agribusiness goes kapoosh in the next couple, I'm going to say less than 2 years. Big agribusiness is going to struggle at its very core to even stay productive and get some yields out of the fields in the north. So when it comes down to it, do you think it would be a wise decision for the Indian farmers to starve out the country until they get political change? Because that might be the only thing that we could do is a Gandhi-esque type thing and say, no farmers are going to grow. If you got a small landholder, grow enough for your families, let the government work it out. I know some people will get starved by accident in the middle there, but if it's going to come down to it, and that's the type of change it takes, is you only grow enough food and let the government collapse because they can't feed everybody, then perhaps that's the way to go. Nonviolent resistance is going to be, I just say no, I opt out of growing food for you. That's it. I opt out. Every farmer should opt out. Government, go grow it yourself. We all opt out because you're going to confiscate our land anyway. I opt out. I'm not growing you a thing.
Well,
and that's where it's going to right now.
What happened?
If they're talking about coming into the rural areas because they can't find enough information on you, and that's their target area for the non-financial data, there's a huge problem here.
So what do they do? Well, I already know what they do according to history. When the farmers say, nah, I don't want to grow the government food, they, classically would get a AK-47 shoved in their face by the state and told them, no, you are going to farm. So it would probably not be an AK-47 per se here, but it would be something similar at that point. That's a scary thought to think of. And I always thought India might be one of those countries that internally, this is a conspiracy theory now. So I'm admitting this totally a conspiracy theory. But based on China's behavior, being the only two countries with more than billion people, right? They would be thinking, how could they reduce their population the most compared to, say, Europe or the United States, who have declining populations? That's a crazy thought. But no, a lot of those articles I showed on my last show were in India, how the insurance weren't paying for their stuff. And there were conflicting articles, which was funny, saying that, there were dying crops and they were hoping on the monsoon saving their crops. But then I read other ones where they're crying because, well, they're getting flooded out and their crops were destroyed. And then I look at the pictures they're showing, and what I see are a bunch of damaged fruits and vegetables that were damaged by man, not by flood. So, like a whole field of watermelons that look like someone just went out there and stomped them so no one could eat them. I was surprised they hadn't tilled it under already. This whole thing about food and travel and freedom is pretty much pivoting now, in my opinion, on the idea that governments, or the world government, not just your government, but all of the governments, have a vote on your health and what you're going to do with your health, where you're going to go. So here's this article right here that talks about, don't worry about it. You won't have to worry about quarantining or any of that stuff, just as long as you get vaccinated. Even though they admit that, you probably could still pass it and you might have to get more vaccines and it might not prevent it. You still might get sick and you still might shed the virus to everybody. And let's not even get into some of the other sciences involved here. But vaccinated people do not need to isolate after COVID-19. Don't worry about it. Once you take their vaccine and get their paperwork, you can now travel. And then here's a weird article I saw where somebody was charged with a crime in Denmark for coughing and shouting while being positive with the coronavirus. So there's your behavior. And then this article here, empty cities in Europe. What will bring the people back? Well, maybe if they relax the laws, which they don't look like they're going to be doing. And where was it? Oh yeah, Biden. 600 million vaccine doses by July. So this is not something that you're going to get to run from the idea. They're going to be pushing it in every state, every county. The stores are going to start saying, we don't want you in our store unless you're vaccinated, which is another reason to check your ID. They already do this over products that you buy, not to mention the law enforcement that wants to see your ID. Wait till the law enforcement wants to see the proof of your vaccination and why you're out traveling. And here Biden's talking about, don't worry about it. You're going to have to keep wearing your masks into the next year. Just keep doing what we say. Don't question it ever. But don't worry about it because we got an alien signal from a habitable world and it's found by scientists. So we're all going to be saved from the Alpha Centaurians 4.37 light years from Earth. No, I'm just kidding. But that also is in the news.
Open the wormhole. Here we go. If these lockdowns are permanent, they're never going to lift. You have to understand that. We're not going back to anywhere normal. This is permanent now until we come through this food shortage at the max in the first wave of 2024, October. Like all this diluting, it's kind of like this Q nonsense that keeps going. Oh, Trump will be back. Oh, he'll be back on the whatever. And then they gave a date, and then and now I saw the newest one. He'll be back on March 4th or something.
Yeah,
it's the same exact thing they're going to keep doing. Oh, you only have to wear the mask until next year. And then it's going to keep going because it's going to get really intense with the food shortages and the economic collapse coming up at the end of the year here. I'm making a bold call. I've made this several times over the last week. We're going to have food rationing by the end of the year in the United States, where you're going to need a phone app for your ration card. You're going to have a blockchain-based app. It's going to be on your phone. In December of 2021 or January of 2022, we are going to be into protein rationing. Now, not all the foods are going to be rationed, of course. Junk food will be readily available.
Yummy.
But if you're going to want to get high-quality protein sources like certain types of steaks and eggs, you're going to be limited on the amount you can buy. And I'm not talking about going into Costco and you can only buy like 1-2 dozen egg pack. It's like you're going to get 6 eggs for a family for a week. That's it. And you're going to be rationed. And you're going to have it on your phone. And you're going to have to show that, just like you said. And when you go into the store, it'll say, you already bought the eggs. Can't get any more. Your ration card says so. But we're going to be pushing that at the end of the year. And the economy, if you got crypto, you're going to be super happy you have some. If you have gold or silver, you're going to be exceptionally happy you have some of that. But the rest of the planet's going to suffer. If nobody took care of themselves with either land and ability to grow their own food, stocked up on seeds, and as an alternative medium to buy things during this transition, like cryptocurrency, for example, it would not even surprise me if Bitcoin went to 350,000 or more by the end of the year. And Ransom, you said, cash it out, but there's a lot of big players going in there. So
no. Cash out. And like a few years. It's obviously like I was trying to show you that the banks are now accepting it as an asset. So that tells you that the bankers are involved in it too. So I only see it going up for the next few years before it crashes. It'll crash around the same time as they inform you your dollar is done.
Well, that will be pretty soon. The dollar thing, I can't see it really lasting past 2022, especially 23. And I see with the oil price rising and the food price rising, this is where the Arab Spring got into the full gear back when that started. And then think about where I was reading this good article called "The Next Super Cycle," and that's happening now because the 2006, 7, and 8 was a super commodity super cycle, and apparently we're running into another commodity super cycle, but this time with your asset cryptocurrency is included in that. So if we're coming into another super cycle for commodities, I'm shaking my head going, oh no, that is not good at all. That is the collapse mechanism right there in front of you. Think about this. If the fuel prices ran to $5 or $6 a gallon like they did in 2008 and 9, and your food prices doubled with nobody working and so many people out of work and so many private businesses closed and everything, that is the absolute recipe for catalyst for societal collapse and complete pitchfork change of government in the street right there. Like that commodity super cycle is the end of society as we understand it functioning right now. It's going to have to reset at that point. Now, maybe that's what these technocracy globalists want to have happen. But the way I see it playing out, I would take some gains at the end of the year and try to pay off all debt. So, see, I'm trying to work this out, Ransom. Let me pick your brain for a second. Because you see that this whole thing, like you'll own nothing. But see, there's this gray area in there. If you already own it outright and you've already paid it off the bank and you don't have no note over it except just for property taxes, like say on your land.
Yeah.
Then how can they come in and confiscate it? Okay, I understand if you have debt on your house and you're still owing $200,000 and the IMF comes in and says, all right, we're going to take over your house and you can live there and live it out, but well, you're not going to own it after that. Versus somebody who's paid down to zero, they live in that they're in that gray area. So my whole thing is about paying everything down to zero and owning it on the paper, like no debt on it. So all I do is pay property tax. See, that's walking the fine line in the gray area because this confiscation of land, property, etc., you have to be in debt for them to do that. If you're out of debt, see, this is where I don't know. Where do you sit on that line?
Well, it's kind of a weird idea to me because when we talk about whether or not you own the land or you don't own the land, they can't take it. In every kind of revolution of this kind of activity, in all of those places, they didn't care whether or not you owned the deed to your land. They just took it because they wanted it. Matter of fact, a good example is Venezuela recently, where you could see Maduro on film just going around saying, hey, what's that building? Okay, I want it. Take it. And they would take it for the state. For everyone. And then imagine this. Right now, a lot of people don't see it this way. There's a big portion of the government that's pushing for debt forgiveness from predatory lending and school loans that they got to go to college and things like that. So once they've decided that debt has no meaning and that you don't have to pay it back, this also is in the reverse way a double-edged sword where the state and all these same people that didn't respect property rights and having debt in the first place will just decide they want things and take them because it's for the good of all. It's kind of a weird thing because I think they would just take it if they wanted it. But you're right. If our system maintains where there's some semblance of property rights, as long as you own your property outright, they shouldn't be able to take it other than like eminent domain or say there's a reason to save something that's on your property. Maybe you got a turtle or a tadpole that's needs to be saved, and then the government can take it that way as well. Or they can just straight up eminent domain it, like I said, and just take it. Or they can raise your property taxes so high that you can't afford them, which is what they've done in places like California, New York, etc., where only specific kind of people with large bank accounts can do it. And another problem a lot of people are having is they are depending on inherited or generational wealth, or maybe they made some money and they're old enough to have made some money in their own lifetime and they've stockpiled that money, if it's still all in money, and they can't work and they can't travel and they can't do this or that, their funds dwindle. So some people barely had a little bit of wealth in the first place that got handed down to them. And if they're sitting around on their properties, just, getting Pizza Hut delivered and whatever ever box store will still deliver to you in a COVID sanitary safe way, their generational wealth will dwindle until they can't pay their property taxes. Now, I'm not talking about our audience, obviously. Most people realize that hard times are coming and they're not only stockpiling food, but resources. Resources will be the key, but I think that you have to plan for every scenario. One, the scenario where you get to keep your land and grow food and have a community. And two, you need to have a plan where the only thing you're taking with you is a bag per person and maybe some seeds in there. And luckily, you'll be in a place that's stable enough for long enough for you to grow enough food to live. But considering so many human beings have done it over the history of human kind, I mean, obviously in the past, some really, really bad times have happened. And I'm sure there was some form of authoritarian peoples at that time that would come and try to take stuff. There were the hunters, gatherers, and the takers in history, and it's the same now. That's my fear, is that once we start diluting our constitutional rights, things like property rights no longer have value. And you can see that in the streets where people are telling people it's just a store, it's just products, don't worry about it, it's insured. Well, you can see, looking through the headlines, that sometimes the insurers do not pay on your losses. And those are not just goods or buildings, those are people's livelihoods and lifetimes, maybe multiple lifetimes, generationally, that worked hard to build that. And it's being disrespected, taken away. And in the certain areas, they just hike the taxes up so far that people can't afford to do business. They can't afford to do business because of the business taxes, the property taxes, and local laws. Like, I was looking at this article you sent me right here, which is a big deal. So, all the fuel prices are going up. So what are we going to do with this article? It kind of made me laugh. Think about it. Sustainable wind power. And you were talking about that at the beginning. Nordic countries require defrosting by fossil fuel. So fossil fuel comes to the record again. But this other thing that you sent me here about reducing CO2 in the atmosphere kind of reaffirms my idea of a communist takeover. But they're not going to let you do anything. If it isn't a pandemic, it will be the environment. If it isn't the environment, it will be your political views that the rest of the people need to be safe from. Or it'll be religious. Maybe they don't want you mixing with it. It doesn't matter what it is. They're coming at us with 1,001 ways to tell you that you need to stay home in your cell and don't question anything at all. Nothing. Just believe them and don't prepare for the future at all.
And I wonder when the day is where they come and they go, that food you're growing on your own land, that seems a little dirty to me. There's dirt on it. You're not allowed to consume that. Only after it goes through a government facility and gets checked for cleanliness could you eat your own food that you grew. I could see something in the future like this. Because look at this guy up in Massachusetts, this climate official. 60% of emissions coming from people driving cars. And he says, well, we're going to go to zero emissions, so we're going to have to break the will of the people to stop them. And boy, he got a lot of pushback from that. That's on Climate Depot, Mark Morano's site.
Yeah,
You got politicians talking about breaking the will of the citizens. Like, they're already broken enough anyway from the COVID and all the tumultuous things with the economy and small business holders, transfer of wealth to the elite. But now you got politicians saying that they need to break the actual citizens' will. I think that's incitement to violence. That person should be banned off Twitter for sure.
Yeah.
Talking about breaking the will of the people, that's definitely incitement to violence. That Massachusetts representative needs to be removed off of all social media. The Undersecretary for Climate Change, David Ismay. You're violating every term of service across Facebook and Twitter. You should be suspended for calling for violence.
Well, let me make you look at this article in a different light. The same article talking about 60% of emissions come from people driving their cars. So it's not people heating their homes. Don't worry about that. It's people driving their cars being bad traveling. Now, let me take you back to this global warming scare here with the 100-car pileup. Now, if you put these two articles together, you can see the direction in which these governmental agents want to legislate or committee away your right to travel. So they're going to tell you that driving is just too dangerous for the public because roads get icy, plus, you're destroying the environment. There's two ways that environmental controlism or authoritarianism is trying to stop you from traveling. And if you stop traveling, then that means you stop doing business. If you stop doing business, there's no commerce, there's no GDP, there's no products moving around. That's the goal. They want to break our will, bankrupt us, and starve us. And I ask you, David, does this not sound exactly like the tactics of any military force whenever they're about to invade a country? What does the United States do when we wanted to invade Iraq the first couple times, like under Big Bush? What we did is we put sanctions on them. And then when the sanctions didn't work to bend them to our will, Clinton dropped bombs on baby food factories, date plants, water filtration facilities, and things like that to malnourish the population. Because if you can take nourishment away from a population, they become weak and dependent. And then when you offer them a solution, they're so desperate that they will take that solution without question. What if that solution is you need to move out of your home, you need to move into a tiny home, you need to stay home, you need to wear a mask, you need to take this vaccine, you need to eat less, all of this so that everybody can be safe because the environment is in danger. And how dare you endanger the environment with your thoughts and your freedoms and all of that? That makes you an eco-terrorist, does it not? Oh, no.
Little Pigtails is now the terrorist in India. She got caught putting out the tweet with her little deck out there for people how to. It was so funny. What was her name? Rihanna said, I saw this tweet. They're making fun. Because in the pack on how to organize everybody to put pressure on the Indian government, there was one little quote that said, "Why aren't we talking about this?" And then you were supposed to choose an article out of the one of the 10 that they chose. And then Rihanna right away, the exact word for word that was in that packet that was given out by Pigtails there to try to destabilize the Indian government and put a lot of pressure on it from politicians and, media personalities, movie personalities. Why aren't we talking about this? Why aren't we discussing this? And then they gave you an article put. It was so funny, in your face. And then they picked out all these movie stars that used the exact same quotes that were in the pack that Greta gave by accident out on the public sphere there of who to tag on the post, which post to put, which words to write, which articles to link after you write it. Just one little, it was always like one quippy little sentence. Busted, and now there's a whole Indian government's looking at her for conspiracy for all these other charges over there. And she's like, I'm the victim. No, you're not. You are a played toy that is now trying to overthrow governments with your whole climate thing. So now it's out in your face again. This is like the 65th thing that the narrative has fallen where that you can see directly behind the illusion now. The whole climate hoax is. And as we move forward down the street here with this whole what you can eat, how many calories you're going to be gifted if you're a good person or not, I want to talk about the seals and the mammoths, if I might.
Yeah.
Because this on No Trick Zone, Pierre Gosselin, he has a site over here, No Trick Zone. If you like Mark Morano's stuff, you're definitely going to like Pierre's stuff over here. So, we've been told that Antarctica's losing ice and the Arctic's losing ice. Antarctica hasn't really lost that much ice in the last 70 years. These are the brand new 2020 reports coming out of the southern oceans surrounding Antarctica. But I want to talk about the elephant seals because, we all love elephant seals. They taste good, especially if they're stir-fried. But the elephant seals can only breed in ice-free waters, sea ice-free waters. This whole report here, this is from Koch et al. 19 and Hall, 2006. show that the elephant seals now have to travel 2,400 kilometers further north when they used to breed 1,000 years ago just to find ice-free waters. This whole hoax of, oh, it's the warmest ever and we're causing the most sea ice loss ever. They're proving now with the elephant seal skeletons and the abandoned elephant seal colonies, etc., through at least, was that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 peer-reviewed published papers on this very study right here, that Antarctica has gained ice and it was much warmer, where these seals were in thriving different areas that need to go thousands of miles and kilometers out of their way now to be able to breed, because so much ice has interfered with their yearly flows. So who's playing who here?
Well, you know what's so funny about this whole idea that they really trick people on a basic elementary school science idea. So they fearmonger over and over and over again about, giant ice cubes breaking off the Antarctic and flooding the ocean. The only problem with this is that everyone knows when you put an ice cube in the water, what happens? The water level stays the same. You're not going to put a full glass of water and you put an ice cube in there and get it just to where it's exactly at the top. And you'll notice that the ice cube will melt inside of there and the water level never goes up. And the same is true, like, if you think about back in some of these ice ages, if there was really water trapped in the poles, that means there was a lot more land available for farming. So there's always an equilibrium of, different zones that become now inhabitable in farming. And they want you to believe like the whole world is going to collapse because of a change here or a change there, when we know throughout history, climate change is a constant and always happening thing everywhere. There's so many ancient societies that just disappeared for one of a couple reasons. Either they had geologic problems all of a sudden, so their environment changed, or they had massive droughts because of weather patterns changing. And guess what? As far as I know, they weren't driving, their SUVs everywhere. I don't think, caveman did it either, or people in the Pleistocene. None of them did that ever. So the whole idea that, that would be the reason that the problem would have, that the world would have problems with all these things is kind of stupid, because really government is the only problem ever in history to kill millions and millions of people. If you don't believe me, look it up, Google it. Democide is the #1 killer of human beings, at least in what we call recorded history. And I would put to you that there was some kind of government before the last flood and before the deluge and before several of these cycles that reduced mankind back down to a small number. It seems one thing was constant is some kind of government, authoritarianism, whether it be religious, or technocratic, or just militarism in some way or shape. Every generation of people has dealt with the same concepts that we're dealing now. So that's weird. Greta, she should be in trouble, because let me show you guys this tweet that she has. I mean, it's almost a laughable joke. Her tweet here. If I could get the page to come up. Here we go.
Yeah, then she tried to cover up her tracks after getting caught with all the information coming out. She's like, oh no, I was just telling people how to do it because, they needed some advice and da-da-da-da. That she tried to cover her tracks, but, that's she dug herself deeper in. Uh-oh.
But she stands with farmers. Hashtag I stand with the farmers and support their peaceful protest. But she got caught trying to start issues, and that this little globalist actress cares not for the single farmer. Come on. Everything about her and everything that she's about diminishes the ability of farmers to actually farm and grow stuff. These people are like the enemies of plants. Can't we get away with just calling them plant enemies? They're after carbon dioxide, right? And they want to tell you that that is a poison, but it's plant food. It's plant food. These people hate plants.
Hug a tree, man. Hug a tree. So let me continue on with this article because I want to. This is the quote of the day for me, in this whole subject here. This is off Glazer 2020 peer review, and then Gears Dottir 2020 also. These are two brand new peer review studies from 2020. Clearly colder today with more ice, glaciers, and sea ice than at any time in the last 10,000 years, except the few centuries during the Little Ice Age. Unprecedented warmth was 10,000 years ago with elephant seals, circa 8,000 years ago with the bison, and the spatial distribution of permafrost has continually been growing since that point when we reached that Holocene warming. So this is it right here. We're colder today than in the last 10,000 years, which means we're slipping back into an ice age. And, perhaps this 2,000-year cooling that I keep pointing to is maybe the tip point back into a real cold event here. And that's why governments are trying to reshift, and reshuffle everything, because it's a lost cause anyway. And so you hit it on the head. And we'll come back and finish up the thought here about who's been controlling society for the last couple million years on this planet. I'm your host, David Dubine, along with Ransom Godwin, 420 TV, Freedom of Films, streaming live tonight. Back in 2 minutes and 2 seconds. FreedomSlips.com, Revolution Radio, Studio A, 10 p.m. to midnight.
What's up? What are you guys doing in the chat? What are you guys doing? I'm trying to not interfere with the show there. I don't think they can hear me. Hello. Hello. What are you guys doing? YOLO. Mofos. Arigato gozaimasu. Roboto. YOLO. Roboto. YOLO. Roboto. I'm scared. I'm all alone in this cave.
I'm your host, David Dubine, right along with Ransom Godwin, 420 TV, Freedom is Film, streaming live tonight on YouTube, as well as Studio A right here. If you consider this type of information important for you and you like free speech like we do, we're big fans, please consider a donation here, Revolution Radio, to keep this venue on air. This will be one of the last venues that survives the purge, that allows us to still speak our minds, compare information, and hopefully get you more prepared and ready for these changes coming up. So, Revolution Radio, take a look at how you can support them. Patrons. You can go over to Patreon. You can get some merch. You can give a direct donation. Take a look at the site. We're going to continue on our show here. Just before the break, Ransom, you brought up a real important thing about there's always seemed to be some sort and form of government. Now, you can go back and you could talk about Lemuria 70,000 years ago. You can find ruins all across the planet out on the continental shelves that would attest to, societies with vast cities out on the continental shelves, 400 feet lower in the ocean. So, everybody's always saying, hey, where's all the evidence? Well, it's 400 feet underwater on the continental shelves. Not widely shared. Graham Hancock did that Underworld series and started to bring that to light a little bit. But what was prior to that? And if we do go start searching back in time, and let's do a little mind experiment here. So we talk about this ice coming and the ice going, like we are slipping into another ice age, and don't know how quickly it's going to go, but for sure this cooling we're heading into that's going to devastate crop production within the next 3 years on our planet is, I would say, once in a 2,000-year cooling event coming up here. At least not since 79 AD. So we're about to repeat that within 3 years, and it's going to come fast and ferocious and like a thief in the night. And, the better pun intended, that's really how fast it's going to onset. And we're starting to see the onset this winter, which is waking a lot of people up in both hemispheres right now. But let's continue. Let's say we do slip into an ice age, and, it ranges anywhere from 10 years, which is peer-reviewed research has showed we can slip into a full-blown ice age in as quickly as 10 years, all the way out to it'll take 1,000 years to manifest. Like, depending on the ice age that's set and unset and come in, and the interglacials and on, and so these cycles that have gone on for the last, let's say 6 million years, the last 60 ice ages, sometimes they hit real quick. Sometimes it takes longer for them to onset. So we get the variance of time of slippage in between, quick or slow. Okay, so what was the government structure 118,000 years ago in the last ice age? We don't have much of that society, because I'm sure there was a pole shift, some sort of geological event that would have buried it, mud flood, maybe there was a massive cataclysm. 70,000 years ago, Toba erupted. I mean, how much stuff's been buried and reshuffled, and, the ecliptic, and where we sit on there's a lot of earth changes that can happen in 100,000 years. But then we go back to the Sumerian myths and legend around 400,000 years ago, down in South Africa, and then it kind of gets blank in there, right? You got the Sumerian myths and legends, and then, okay, the Indian Vedas say that we've been around for 21 million years. So where's the disconnect between 400,000 years with the Sumerian text on the, Sitchin's, not the greatest interpretation by any means, but, with Michael Tellinger really getting in down there, doing a lot more work and finding Adam's calendar, there's a whole bunch of things. Okay, so we can establish pretty much a 400,000 year date around South Africa for some emergence of governments. That's 4 ice ages. But then we get this gigantic gap to the Indian Vedas 21 million years ago, where humans were around. So this whole timeline of Lucy with the footprint 3 million years ago, okay, they're trying to explain that humans were around because we're finding a lot of these artifacts in the wrong strata. They call them like out of strata artifacts, not out of date or out of place artifacts, but out of strata, meaning they're finding a hammer in a coal layer that should have been, 30 million years in the making. Perhaps it was. Because if, like the Indian Vedic texts talk about, humans being around for 21 million years. Okay, now you got the date range. Where's the myths and pieces, Ransom? And what kind of governments have been there? And are we talking about a beneath the earth, inner earth society that's the real true rulers of the planet? Or are we talking about something you've been alluding to, the invasion possibly, now the global technocratic elite coming in to do their thing and come into a communist utopia? You can only take it so far. At that one point, you enslaved everybody, and then what? You have a world full of slaves, and then what? Then they have all the money, they have all the power, they can live as long as they want with the eugenics and the different augmentation of reality. Great. Well, then you just have a handful of billionaires that are probably bored with each other, living to be 200 years old, and a bunch of slaves around. Let's say there's 1 billion slaves left on the planet. Okay, and then see, there's a disconnect, and everybody has a real hard time trying to jump to that next level of and then what? So where's the history lying there? And I really believe this government structure that you alluded to has always been here. Is it from an inner Earth society that's been around for 25, 30 million years that's still intact? They never would have been set back with the surface layer, what we're about to be hit with. They would have, like the Borg in some of these Star Trek episodes, they'd have a continuous 25 million year long government structure in place, or 20 million year long government structure in place that never would have been broken. It would be continuous. So can you imagine the level of control in that place? Or are we talking something like Jupiter ascending, where the Earth is nothing more than a farm? Farming techniques for different countries. You got different farms. You got cattle farms. You got, whatever. So that's my whole thing, is where does all this dissect and meet in the middle? Because I know you were getting to it, and I'm trying to fill in the pieces for people listening. I think I know where your mind might be trying to pull this. Government structure, above Earth, beneath the Earth, but it's always been there.
As above, so below, as what they say, right? No,
That's true.
I can see that.
Maybe both. Maybe I'm too limited thinking either A or B. Maybe it is both.
Yeah. I think that
derivative of another.
They see, when you're talking about this history of man, you got to remember we're not the only man that's been here. A lot of people forget that. There's been several different incarnations of human beings that we know of. And that's only because we interbred with them. There's still a mystery out there. Where did Cro-Magnon, fully functioning modern human, come from? There's no traces of him. He just pops up. Boom, there he is. They tell us that Neanderthal, Denisova, and some of these mystery ghost species were probably living on the earth for hundreds of thousands of years without change. But then all of a sudden, one day, Cro-Magnon man pops up and starts spreading around the world, mixing with everyone, and then weird things start happening. Farming has driven the genes on this planet. So it's funny that you ask, are we a farm planet? Well, I think the answer is yes, and we're also a prison planet. Because what is the ultimate goal of having complete control of every single mind on the planet? And that's to have a workforce to do whatever you want. The question is what is the goal after they get to the place where they can now build this system of whatever scary nightmare they have planned? But I do think that there's been an ongoing government of some kind. It's over time, it's morphed from religion to militarism to a mix thereof. But overall, even like you can ask the Satanists, the Luciferians, Islam, Christianity, Hinduism, Jew, they all have a negative character outcome, and that character usually is involved with controlling the planet, the entire planet. It's kind of like that story about Jesus going up and fasting for 40 days and Lucifer coming to him as a lion and offering him the whole world because he was in control of the whole world, or at least delusionally thought so. In the same way, the beast system of technocracy, it doesn't have to be religious. It's still the same concept. You have, and it always goes back to this idea of a fallen one who spread knowledge and enlightenment among the mankind, whichever mankind it was. So we already know that several different mankinds had different histories for hundreds of thousands of years. And we're giving that number 400,000 years. That's funny that they say, Neanderthal man was just kicking it in Europe by himself, doing his thing, not farming, hunting and gathering for hundreds of thousands of years. But then all of a sudden, the genetics dramatically change on all the continents to the genes that are dominant, which happens to be the farmers. A good example of this is they've studied the genes of prehistoric Britons. So the Druids and these other people had a certain set of genes dominant for quite some time. And then all of a sudden, when people come in from the Iberian Peninsula and start farming, the genetics, 90% overwhelmingly change in all of the bodies found after that. So if there is a government and they are farming, you have to ask yourself, what is the most precious commodity on the planet? And it doesn't seem to be food. It seems to be thought. Thought. And it's funny, I was watching an old Twilight Zone where they were, or no, excuse me, it was Alfred Hitchcock, where they were talking about the four dimensions in actual reality. We always say time is the fourth dimension, but actually there should be another dimensional space of thought and imagination, because we have a physical realm. And if you think about this, every idea that mankind of any kind has ever come up with came from a place of imagination, and they brought this idea out of a place that didn't exist and made it an object in the material world we live in. From everything simple as a rock tool all the way to the modern technological stuff that we're doing now. Now, you got to ask yourself, where does that information come from? And that would be the source of this government. Now, is it the only one? Is it the only one broadcasting into someone's, thought, imagination? It doesn't seem like, unless the information was already encoded into our genetics to come up with ideas, that somewhere, someplace, there's a message being sent to us over time, if not directly, but maybe indirectly, because think about the imagination of what a human being can come up with. We've invented so many things, so many ideas. Now, introduce an extraterrestrial or a non-human entity into the mix, and what kind of imagination or information would it be putting out, and where would that be coming from? So you can take it from extraterrestrials to AI, and I want to show you guys an article and give David a chance to respond. Well, actually, two articles. This first article.
But let me
yeah, go ahead.
Then you need to put in the 10 grams of psilocybin tea on top of that, and then see where that takes the whole mix too, with the alien human hybrid with 10 grams of mushrooms in a tea. And then what kind of Sunday afternoon would that be on the Iberian beach with the Neanderthal date that you have chilling on the sand? Oh, wait.
Yeah. So I bring in the AI into this idea of where do these ideas and information come from. So we have several different technologies out there that are computing into the quantum realm, 1, 0, and 1 and 0 at the same time, opening up exponentially the possibilities of predicting and computing. And then you see companies like this doing very basic stuff. And if you look at these pictures, these are lifelike, exact replicas of humans that don't exist. So they're not actually replicas, but they do look human. And then I want to take you over here to this article at InfoWars, where Elon Musk and Joe Rogan were discussing the idea of, now that we can implant something into our mind, like Johnny Mnemonic, Neuralink, we can start getting this information hijacked from a new place, not the place of thought and imagination, but the place of the grid, the internet, and the algorithm. And so they're talking about everything from sex to, everything we do will be in this AI populated place. Now, you got to ask yourself, if we're living in a time where they're telling you to stay home and you can't go anywhere, there's going to be a certain amount of the population that they figure they can just hook into this algorithm, and for some, that will be the end of their evolutionary branch on the tree. They'll just, not have children. They'll no longer have ideas, goals, none of that. They'll just live in this post-human era and blink out of existence. Now, another group of people are going to be doing something else, but are they? What if you're born with this implant in your head, which looks like a trend that may be not unheard of or talked about soon, so that they could get rid of some of your thoughts? Now, they already have patents and products out by the DoD, implantable chips into the head that can control your anger and your mood. And I was just showing people on my last broadcast how they're using radio waves to find out what your emotional state is, on top of some of these other technologies that can literally see what you're thinking. And this may seem simple to you, these ideas of monkeys playing video games mentally, or pigs with the ability to use joysticks and other complex things, integrating not just us, but every single animal into this matrix of governmental authoritarian technocracy. And then think about what we've talked about a lot is all of your food buying power and everything else is all getting tied up into this virtual system of control. So the control is not even coming from the physical plane anymore. And I've brought up to my viewers over and over again that articles, programs, even movies on Netflix, presidential speeches, all written by an algorithm. Who's programming the algorithm? I don't know. But what if no one's programming it? What if they're just getting this information from the quantum level, hijacking the natural way that we get these changes? And I've been reading a lot about genetics and the argument now about how evolution can be driven by choice and not just adaptation. So, like individuals or animals thinking a certain thing can develop DNA to help them progress along that path. And now we have scientists hijacking this and governments hijacking this whole concept, which goes down to your individual path on the earth in reality, which is a pretty big concept.
Yeah, you go back to the Jinn and Ahriman, and you wonder about this AI entity trying to harness the human computing power of our brains, which is limitless. Boom. Not the storage, but the computing power, Yep. It seems like it's trying to realign humanity to allow it to reconnect back to the creator because it was booted out, disconnected from source, the river of knowledge. And this entity, you got to think about it, to be a non-feeling, emotionless computer program running, and sometimes there's glitches in it.
Ooh.
But it itself is trying to reconnect back to the creator because the disconnect was there. So how would you, as because the representation is a fallen angel, something removed from the source, completely disconnected. The firewall's up between, the oneness of creation and something that maybe tried to overthrow or override the computer algorithm, got kicked out, firewalled off, and sent as a virus down, and then completely separated. So you got to think about it in because you're talking about AI, so you got to talk in the computer syntax here, and you got to blend religion too. So when you're talking about God or oneness or the creation and all time space, that whatever it was separated and firewalled out. So that's what the AI is, as you're referring to. So it's trying to get back up and connect back to source again. Now, is it going back and I'm like, hey, I really want to come back, sorry? Or is it like, I'm coming back and I'm going to jump in and try my second attempt to overthrow whatever that was in heaven as the metaphor?
You just blew my mind with an idea you gave me. The whole concept of fallen angel may be, big time mistranslated. What if when they mean a fallen entity or fallen angel, what they're actually talking about is something that was trapped in the quantum realm? And, we'll get back to this idea of this information that kind of gets broadcasted to us from this dimension of thought. And you're talking about our brains being a quantum computer. It's specifically designed to pick up this frequency and tap into thought and imagination. But if something got separated from this material realm, this universe we live in, and got sent down to the quantum realm, how would it get back here? How would it come back to the source other than, tampering with us where we can build a vessel for it to interact back in this plane again? How would it get in here into the quantum computer that's designed to get back to that place of thought and imagination, creation, and, kind of goodness that a lot of stuff comes from? It would have to go through a biological route because only biological computers seem to be able to access that realm. So if you were down in the quantum level, you would have to wait around until someone built something that would make a bridge from that quantum realm to this realm and send your information there, allowing you to tap right into the brain, maybe through an implant or maybe through a signal that's being broadcasted from posts in each and every neighborhood where you live. Just an idea. I don't know.
No, that would be it, because you got to think about the human brain in two different ways here. computing power and computational power versus storage. The computational power is the thing that draws what you're talking about, those thoughts, the idea, the creativity, straight out of the river of knowledge. That's an endless source of reconnection, but you're not saving space on that. Saving the space is the memories, and the brain is limited on what it can save, but it's not limited on what it can process.
Right.
So if you're talking about this AI, this algorithm stuck in the quantum, for it to touch back into source and reconnect back to that river of knowledge again, you need the human entity, you need the human brain. Now, would one be enough to do that?
Now, how big
Perhaps.
is this program? Yeah, now you got to ask
what
yourself.
What if you had 8 billion brains doing it?
Wow, yeah.
Or what if 8 billion was too much and it overrode the program and it was too much for even the AI to handle on that, or it needed to trim down into a certain, so it might be an overboard amount of computational power of 8 billion here, because then those few stray minds could throw off what the AI's algorithm in the quantum space is trying to do, because these, what you're talking about, these dangerous thoughts, they're out of sync with what needs to be a pure running program. So 8 billion is too many, because you have too many lone wolf thoughts out there. You have too many unsynced thoughts moving around, interfering with its protocol. So it's going to try to trim off the fat at the edge. So there's only a pure running thought process that allows it to gain its goals, and everything else around that. So maybe that human population needs to be trimmed from 8 billion to 3 billion, but the 3 billion need to be completely trained to think a certain way. And I think you see where I'm going with this idea.
I knew we were
too
all
much
Grays.
Thought is a negative for it. It has to have a certain perfect amount of thought of the human brain resonance and computational reconnection back to source, without all the interference, that static interference of free thought in there. So bring back into this technocracy, the implantable tech inside the transhuman movement. And could you not trim out a race into being that perfect conduit with the perfect thought process for something that's in I would not even say off grid, off world, but in a different dimensional space in the quantum realm, to use and harness the human to the full resonance precision down to like 1,000th of a megahertz precision to reconnect back up.
It really sounds like the description of these elite people. I mean, it may be on other levels. There may be whole families of people that have bred themselves away from the ability to tap into the source. That may be why they don't like the population and want to control it. But you're right. If an entity or a program or whatever you want to call it was so big, it would need a certain amount of storage space and processing power, which the human being is the perfect example of both of those. We have limitless storage space in our RNA and DNA, that's in our chromosomes and genetic material. It's the number one way to save information over millions and millions of years. So the storage is not a question. Now, the operating system that runs the quantum computer is in charge of telling that storage system what to store. And you're right about memories, which seem to be fading and fleeting. However, genetic information stays for millions of years. So if you could control just 1 billion, I mean, think about the example of how they changed the stock the other day. The small guy changed the stock. Think about that in reverse. If you could run a machine that could tap into 1 billion people and make them all compute the same idea or push the same idea or have the same emotion. We talk about manifesting things and people do these thought experiments. Imagine if you could control that thought experiment to make everyone, like you said, right down to a designed exact way, think exactly the same thought. What could you create from that realm of thought and creation? It looks like it's turning out to be something dark. I don't know. I'm just saying.
Well, dark for us as a human, because we understand love and light and free choice. But perfect alignment for this thing that's a non-entity quantum realm thing that has no emotion, because it's already an emotionless thing. So for it, light or dark, it doesn't really matter. Perhaps it does know the difference if it was the fallen angel that was kicked out. It previously knew the light, separated so far. But this is so interesting because there's actual terms for this in different religions. If you're looking at Islam, they call it Ar-Rahman, and the jinn is another kind of term for this thing. It's been around. Archons might be a different name for it. The archonic energy, they vibrate. And we're talking about rifting between dimensional realms here. And that D wave, they're jumping over into another realm, if you will, to relay information. But what's answering the question on the other side?
Exactly.
This has been talked about time immemorial. The Gnostics also talked about this. I watched this David Icke video a couple of days back, and he described it pretty much in perfection of what these archon energies that seem to be what this AI is right this second has been talked about for, I don't know, at least 6,000 years and quantified in words in which we understand in today's language even. The Gnostics were the first ones to really try to define what it was in terms of a vibrational frequency. And see, where my information blends in is we're coming into a time now where the frequency is going to be reset electromagnetically. So what happens, this AI is already predicting where the frequency is going to shift to, or it's trying to hold on to bend the shift itself using the human mind frame to maybe affect the sun. Like, see, it goes into the realms of possibility of, if Mercury can stop sunspots, and it's such a tiny thing, 2 million times smaller is this thing than the sun, and it stops massive sunspots electromagnetically from firing off and sending any types of solar projected to the Earth. Now, what happens if we have 8 billion people with thought firing back at the sun? See, this is where we come into this whole, we never thought about utilizing 8 billion people thinking the same thing. The AI program does. This quantum-based, whatever you want to term it as, Ahriman does. But we're at that individualized level where we can't think consciously enough of 8 billion people manifesting something. Perhaps it's a galaxy-wide thing that actually every planetary system in the entire galaxy of hundreds of billions of stars in our own galaxy are terrified that we 8 billion humans will come together and resonate on the same frequency field about a certain thought, because that could reverberate through the entire galaxy, not just our own star and our own planet. And so this is where you start to talk about, the harnessing of it, because the sun's stepping down in the electrofrequency, second magnetic fields forming out in the outer solar system. So we're about to get reset on the baseline frequency for where the human resonance is going to operate. We're changing stations right now from like 106.1 to like 107.2. And wherever this magnetic field hits and reshuffles and then resets, that's where we're going to get locked into. So would this quantum consciousness AI understand where that frequency is going to bend to? How many cycles has this thing been through in the last 21 million years? And are we going back to a start point? I mean, how many possible combinations are there? Because you got to think about in physics, really, if we're going on a linear, there's only 360 degrees that we can go around. There's only so many combinations of degrees of variance and frequency change before we snap back to have a repeat somewhere in the cycle. We're talking about let's say every 10,000 years that happens, we get a reset on the frequency, or every 100,000. If you're going back 21 million years, that's an enormous amount of retweaks of possibility of resetting on cycles. That somebody following 21 million years of cycles of electromagnetic reset on the human resonance field and the frequency field we exist in. Because I'm wondering if when we get reset into a new frequency field, if suddenly things are going to pop into our vision that we didn't see before. And then over the next 10,000, 20,000 years, they'll become normal, or we will have rid the world of those things. So it'll just be like myth and lore and legend. When you talk about, think about some of these old, like werewolves, mermaids, all these kind of thing. Like there was a lot of that, flying dragons, flying vampires, or what. There was something back in the past that seemed to have a physical form, but it doesn't any longer. Either we've eradicated it, maybe they could see it and they could define it better because a new resonance field had been reset and they were able to see those things that were once unseen. I am absolutely sure we're going into another one of these frequency field changes right now. This is why people are freaking out and they're seeing all kind of stuff. And schizophrenia, and people are just getting all these emotions, super high charge, and they're seeing stuff all over the place out of the periphery of their visions and hearing things. And it's almost like they're second judging their own very limited amount of emotions and our own very little, super limited. Like what we can see is so limited with our visual frequency. Like out of your eyes, you can see almost nothing. So out of a whole 100% of space of light frequency, I think we could see like what 1/10 of 1% of everything that's out there in the light spectrums. We can't see in infrared. Come on, and it's hard to see. So we're going to get reset and to start to see, hear things, and feel things that we've never. Well, perhaps we have, but will be new for us. And I think that's where we're heading. I think that with all this reset and all these changes, quantum wise, and everything fits into this time frame right now for the reset frequency wise. And trying to game the frequency reset.
Yeah. That's exactly what it is, trying to game it. Because what would you do? Yeah, you made a good point, though. And I'm not going down any religious thing. We're just talking about a basic, concept that could be explained in so many different ways. But you were talking about how the idea of a fallen one came from that source and kind of knows the frequency. It knows what it is, what it wants to get back to, or what it wants to do. So if you had that kind of information and you were using, say, meat people, meat sacks, us, to get back there, you'd know exactly the kind of frequencies and adjustments to block out any kind of cycle. So like we're going into a change. What would you do if you didn't want normal human beings to go through that change or start thinking that same idea or go down a new path? You might, I don't know, put a mask around their face, limit their oxygen. You might change their DNA a little bit. You might totally change the fabric of nature in their environment by completely bombarding them with new signals, constantly keeping them in an elevated state of fear, maybe reducing their food and their nutrition through different means, maybe putting a little bit of chemical additives to their beverages. Yeah, I mean tap water. But yeah, it seems like what you laid out there is exactly happening, that the government or the entity or whatever it is that's controlling the basic man on this planet or wants to control them is completely doing everything in their power to, hijack, throw a wrench in, or stop the cog there and make the wheel stop of what we're supposed to be doing by keeping us totally distracted on something else. And what's so funny is it seems like there's a simple answer to this problem, and that is completely disconnect sometimes from this whole entire system of technocracy. Yes, we can use it to our benefit, but you can also turn it off and unplug and get out there, put your hands in the soil and do what you're meant to do, which seems like we were totally designed to help life along by farming and, using livestock and stuff like that to control the domain that we live in, the natural domain. And when you do that, you disconnect from that other stuff and it kind of resets your own operating system. And anybody that's been outside just doing forest bathing, nature, hiking or gardening or farming or any of these things outside knows that there's a total different energy within your whole body and mind when you do that. So you can turn it off, you can block it, and you can get back to your original path. And I think that's what the message really that we need to send to people is you can say no to the system. You still have the right of choice no matter how many technologies pile up on you, no matter how many systems of control. You do have choice of thought, choice of lifestyle until you don't. And, I don't know what to tell you about that, but I really like Sun Tzu, The Art of War, and I don't want to be a gardener in a war. I would rather be a warrior in my garden, so to speak.
That pertains to this time and this frequency. Because this frequency that we're in, our bodies need to eat a lot more food, apparently, in a lot of things that I've read, comparatively, where we can go in the different frequency changes that have been mapped out, especially in the Indian Vedic, especially the Yuga cycle. Like a lot of these cycles that are mapped out, going on the highs and the lows of where the human frequency can go, it determines the amount of input into the body that's required to keep it up and running lacking the spiritual or the energetic edge that hasn't manifested because we're vibrating at such a low frequency that the spiritual nourishment of something can't break through to the physical. So the higher up we go and the more we resonate on these higher frequency levels, the less sustenance that we need to take in our bodies. So we're currently need to farm now. We currently need to grow the food to eat. But through so many stories in history, so many talks in societies and civilizations through the past, like we only needed literally a fraction of what we consume right now to stay alive. And you got to think about what would have been happening at that point. Let's say you only need 1/50th as much food to consume and 1/50th as much sleep as you do now. And you could regulate your body temperature by thought. And how different would the world be? We wouldn't farm the way we do now because you just wouldn't need it for your bodily intake. So how would the society and the forest and the nature and everything would be completely different? Because even if we're needing to intake 1/10 of what we do today, we would probably, look in if you go down to the Kalahari Desert, there's these enormous amount of, they call them the canals, the Kalahari Desert canals. And apparently they did the mathematics and they're spaced 75 feet apart, and they used to be raised beds. And at full production, it was enough for about 1 billion people our size. And we got into the conversation before, what if they were giants? Well, that size would come down. But think about that. Mega farming in one location on the planet only to feed the rest of the planet, because obviously they had the electric gravitics and different kind of technologies to be able to deliver almost instantaneously. Because you imagine if you had craft that moved at 8,000 miles per hour on using electrogravitics and anti-gravity technology, it would be a whole different world. Like you could grow in Africa and go deliver in the States in 30 minutes. So to think about the amount of food that we would need to sustain our living bodies and water and shelter and all these things would be very different depending on the frequency field that we're going to exist in, have existed in, or are busting into for the first time, whatever you're going to paint those pictures out there. It's going to be one of those three. We've already been there. We're repeating the cycle. We're back to it again. Or we're going somewhere new where we haven't been. We're breaking into a new cycle on maybe like a half of a cycle different. Instead of like 106.1, it'll be 106.15, somewhere different in there. So something definitely is on the change. And I'm really curious how the world will shift as our frequency shifts, and because I really highly doubt we're going to need more resources moving forward. If we're shifting into a lighter vibration, if we're going into a different kind of frequency field, I think this human body as we know it now, this like you say, meat suit, is going to need less input to keep functioning. Great Reset, they're telling us in so many levels, it's in your face on so many ways. You just have to look at these different levels going deeper.
That's funny you were talking about that. So what you're telling me is basically we're being farmed to become a whole batch of little spindly, big-headed grays that can process information, but don't take that much intake. So we'll be like little insect creatures. You'll just get your bottle of soda pop, your high fructose corn syrup, and suck it up like a little ant and then go back to your processing job. No, I'm just kidding. Actually, I wanted to be serious for a minute. And because I've been kind of working with some of your videos or whatever, I've got the just that you've been really deeply studying how human beings have hid under rock structures, caves, megaliths, all of this stuff like that. And then it went into the era of megalithic buildings. So what is it you think they knew? I mean, besides the obvious of being fried from some kind of solar output, what do you think the major, like, kind of religious or spiritual reason, or I guess, how did they come about knowing that they could just hide like ants inside of these caves and these, there's different dwellings all across Europe where they just used a big megalithic stone that was probably in the earth already and just kind of built a home underneath it. And then second, you're talking about these anti-gravitic vehicles. Can you imagine having a 2-story, like 6-bedroom house that you just pushed a button on and it took you from the northern hemisphere down to the equatorial zone or down to the southern hemisphere. So you could just continue farming. Like, so you could just farm all year in different places. You could just go from one place to the other. But really, I'm curious about, do you think we'll ever have to return to a time where human beings have to hide under the stones? And it's obvious that they did at one time, from North America to Europe to Africa, South America, all over the place. We had these megalithic homes, temples, etc. And you can go into all kinds of different directions of why, but it seems like the most basic, and there's evidence to support that in both Anwar province in Egypt and also in Pumapunku and places like Machu Picchu, where you have megalithic stones that are scorched with something so hot it had to have been probably plasma or something to that degree, because there's no residue of like volcanic activity or things like that. There's just vitrified, melted stone, and there's only a couple of conclusions you can come up with this, from Mohenjo-daro to wherever. Either nuclear devices were set off, or there was an overwhelming output of some kind of hot plasma gases that just totally burned, scarred, and destroyed some of the megalithic structures. And if you were in North America, Europe, or some of these other places that were maybe less developed architecturally and other things, you would have had basic shelters, like some of the ones you show all across North America, these stone roofed, covered megalithic hideouts. And yeah, the main question, do you think we'll ever have to hide among the stones to not only block out the government or the frequency that's being bombarded on you, but just plain from the environment?
Oh, yes, in 2024, October. And you asked that real important question, like, how did they know where to go to hide out from all these events? I'll answer that. Same way we know to go where we are now to hide out from all these events. Because all those cave paintings, and all those megalithic blocks, and all those things that we found from the past as clues, like, hey, they saw something massive here in the canyons. We know where the safe canyons are. We know where the dolmens are. That's where those, they call them stone houses, if you will. They have little holes. And they all seem to have something very similar and very common across the entire planet. Doesn't matter what continent you go to. It's those giant rocks that are laid on top, and they seem to have some sort of round hole entrance that can be plugged up, kind of like a cork being pulled from the inside back into the bottle. And if you notice, we know where all those safe spots were. And I'm just saying, we're on another wheel of the cycle here, and these cycles go back stretching how many hundreds of thousands of years, if not millions of years. So these areas have been marked out on the planet, and I am sure if sea levels were 400 feet lower, there's an enormous amount of caves that had air pockets that are stuck down there, 200 feet below sea level, 300. Because you know how many cave systems are across the planet that have been flooded? Mexico and Central America is a perfect example. They keep, they'll be scuba diving kind of through a cave system, and boom, they'll open up into a perfectly dry room that the air hasn't been touched in thousands of years. And they always find stuff in there. Well, people were living back in there. So again, if sea levels decrease by 400 feet, we're going to start finding an enormous amount of cave paintings, an enormous amount of cave art from the last ice age that has been, but maybe it wasn't the last age. Maybe it was a pre-70,000 year artwork section. Because you got to think about if they were inhabiting that, and that artwork they would have put up there would have been at least 30, 40, 50,000 years old on the cycles they lived through. Like, what we're understanding is these safety zones to go are the newest ones that are at this present sea level range and at this present mountain level range and the altitude we're at and the longitude we're at. We understand that from this last cycle. Enough clues have been left, at least through the last 12,000 years, that these areas can be safe for whatever happens. So as we enter a new ice age and as it onsets, I'm not saying it's going to onset in 2024, but I'm saying within the next 5 or 6 generations, we're going to be into a new ice age. And as the sea levels decrease, these areas for safe zone are going to multiply. There's going to be way more of them because we're at the high level now where the sea levels are really high and we're really squeezed in on certain levels of the crust. Subtract sea levels 200 feet and we're going like 100 miles out in the continental shelves. There's going to be more farming, land, like you said, but we're going to start to discover probably an enormous amount of stuff from 70,000 years ago, or maybe even further back in the past, the last ice age. And, because what we're lacking here is 118,000 years ago, where are the artifacts, the artwork, this kind of society? Because they had 10,000 years of warmth also. They developed something. Perhaps it's deeper in the oceans at a different level, about 1 to 200 feet under our current sea levels. That's where we would be finding the previous civilization from the last interglacial. Because the last interglacial was cooler than ours right now. So we're going to be, we had that little bump up, and then this interglacial is supposed to be coming into something like on the 400,000 year cooling, according to the next cycle. Because, you know, they can go back millions of years in these glacial cycles, and you can start to find a little pattern of fives in those. And it seems to start coming into the fifth. You know, is it the fifth time of man, or was that a metaphor? Is it the fifth, you know, snowball Earth kind of glacier period we're moving into? I mean, none of us are going to be alive when this happens, but we're back on a huge cycle for the glacial cycle too during this time. Like we're running into a supermassive snowball Earth glacial cycle on this one too. So there's a lot of cycles culminating here from millions of years, hundreds of thousands of years. Everybody knew where the safe spots is. So if you see plasma bolts in the sky and you see all kind of, you know, squatter man in the heavens and Earth rifting, and you're going to run probably to these spots that you know that there's ancient megalithic man had run to for safety. I'm going there first. Where are the caves up in Chota with the Cherokee? I'm going there first. And where would you go? Because you've already been all over those canyons. You know, Ransom, you know exactly what those things, with all those canyon, you know, petroglyphs, you know what those are, plasma discharge that they saw. So there's got to be a lot of safe spaces out west, you know, tucked in those canyons and overhangs and mesas and stuff.
Yes. And that's something I actually wanted to do a show with you on, is say we had this scenario next year, like just all of a sudden there's bolts of lightning. It's just crazy outside. The weather gets crazy. And you're seeing all this electromagnetic activity. Say it just happened next year. Where would you go? And you were talking about some of the ancient Cherokee sites, caves, and whatnot. What's fascinating is I believed I've deciphered a lot of the stones here in New Mexico with depictions of stepped pyramids. And in my opinion, those stepped pyramids that they show, each one are different according to the location, and they're a map showing the surrounding areas. And there just so happens to be one in the center of New Mexico along the Rio Grande Valley that shows 3 different types of stepped pyramids. And my theory is that those are the locations of the most cliff dwellings and ancient man. And also, those are also the locations of the petroglyphs. But beyond that, one of them shows an entrance under a giant mountain. And that happens to be the one that seems to be depicting Three Rivers, New Mexico, because behind the backdrop of Three Rivers, where the petroglyphs are, there is the only, 12,000 foot mountain for, at least 500 miles, I would say. And it's also the only habitable zone if there were bad times. It's the only place that has elk and deer and porcupine and things like that, pine nuts and other things that will survive cold. That's the only place. But underneath all of that mountain range, from its northern end to its southern end, which happens to be a place called Carlsbad Caverns, which is some of the biggest caverns in the world. Now, they don't think too many primitive man went in there. We know miners found it at certain times. But in other places like the north end of South America, the south end of Mexico, there are massive cave systems and cenotes, and they have found lots and lots of bones and artifacts in these caves. There's also giant caves in India, China, and Europe. And all of these places have a lot, and not to mention Turkey. And all of these places have evidence of massive dwellings that could hold lots and lots of people. And not only that, there's food in there. Bioluminescent funguses, worms, insects, fish, all kinds of stuff that you wouldn't expect in there. Whole ecosystems that can house people for quite some time. Now, if you added the idea, like some people insist that maybe in Egypt and other places they had things like Baghdad batteries that could put out certain amounts of watts depending on the size of the battery, you could have lighting in there. Totally due to just knowing alchemy, is what they used to call it, or chemistry today. You could produce electricity without a grid and have lighting and live for some time. And I wanted to talk to you seriously about. So, if you lived in North America, which is probably where most people are watching us from, where would you go? And there are some places like Carlsbad Caverns and other places, all across the United States. We have a massive cave system from Missouri and Tennessee all the way over to, I would say, about Nevada area. And it's weird that this channel runs along and starts on the 33rd degree parallel. And if you go across the southwest United States, you'll see that there are two zones, one up around where Diamond and Rex live in Pagosa, like a little south of there, where there's lots of canyons and things where ecosystems haven't changed in forever. So we know that there was water there, massive floods there, cliff dwellings, big populations of people living in times that were horrible in other places. So where would we go? That's a great topic. If you were just sitting somewhere in some state, where would you go? Do you know where a cave's at that's stable and could house you for some time? And then also, how would you drink water and eat food? I think primitive man has a lot of lessons to teach us if we would listen.
Yeah, because out in East Tennessee, there's this one really, really large cave. I think it's called the Lost Sea, and I remember going there as a kid. And it's large. It's not as large as the Carlsbad Caverns, but it's super gigantic. And there would probably be a line of cars going there, I'm sure, if something were to happen. But if you go even further south, down toward the Georgia border, there's a whole other sets of caverns all the way down there too. I mean, incredibly large. The Cumberland, you have the Cumberland Caves, and there were Native Americans living in there for how many tens of thousands of years. But where you look across the landscape, yeah, you got to wonder how many of those cave systems were connected to each other back, and still is more the correct. And could you live in there? Yeah, possibly.
And
but
who
I've
else
been
is
in a
in
couple
there?
underground cities. I went to Czech Republic, and there's this one area called Neumo, which is down near the Austrian border, and it's in the wine-growing country. It's under a castle, and at the high time, they had 5,000 people living underground there. I'm not I don't like claustrophobia, and those tunnels are real small for me. And I've been to Derenyanku and a few other. I went to Turkey and Cappadocia. I've been to some underground cities. I'm not a fan because it's just so incredibly claustrophobic. I was really super claustrophobic because it was very like super wild style. In Neumo, they only have repaired just like 1 kilometer out of the 50 kilometers of tunnels. And you can go wandering through, but you definitely need a guide. But they'll take you through. And when you get into the areas that haven't been repaired since like the last 2,000 years, it's downright spooky and claustrophobic and tight. And that's just not my scene. But they were saying people lived down there for years during the sieges and things. And I'm like, are you kidding me? No, thank you. No, thank you. I couldn't do it. For me, I'm not an underground kind of person like that. I don't think I could exist like that.
What if the underground was like really big though?
Yeah, let me throw one last thing. Mustang Valley, for anybody out in Nepal who likes to do trekking, you ever heard of a place called Mustang Valley? It's way out west in Nepal. You need permits out the yin yang. You can barely go into that region. It's a high desert region. The Nepali government claims it's to protect the heritage, and they don't want to be too disturbed by the visitors going up there. They don't want it to turn into Annapurna or something. But lo and behold, on my underground cave research and whatnot, there are vast cities in Mustang, underground caverns connecting between mountain ranges and things. I think that's why there's so many permits needed and you can't go anywhere up there. It's because they don't want you to find that vast civilization of connected underground tunnels, cities, and I swear it looks like 40-floor apartment buildings that got buried up by debris in there. The precision of the floors and everything. I was so shocked. Because I wanted to go to Mustang, but there was definitely some interconnection in those mountains and a huge lost, massive underground civilization in Mustang area of Nepal.
Yeah, that's funny because that's what I was just about to ask you. You were saying you're claustrophobic, but we have tons and tons of stories, and not just stories. We know of giant caverns. Like Carlsbad Cavern is a good example, but it's not one that's been habited. There are rivers in Europe that you can go down boats and go through these massive caves down there. And we're not talking claustrophobia. We're talking 100-foot ceilings, 20-foot ceilings. And then some of these a lot of the stories that go back to ancient man talk about giants and underground cities. I mean, from the Greeks to the Sumerians, all of them talk about these cities underground and all the way up into recent times, like Admiral Byrd and stuff. I don't know how much you've got into like Operation High Jump, but they're talking about massive subterranean caverns where cities are already established. So maybe that's not true, but we do know that in modern times there are similar type things. Like, so in Missouri, they have massive underground limestone caverns that the United States government carved out. It's rumored that all of these are interconnected, like with Los Alamos, New Mexico, Holloman Air Force Base, Area 51, etc., etc. However, we do know that they keep all of the national artifacts in there, like copies of movies and yada, yada, yada. So if that's just what they're telling us, you know that they have massive backup reserve of government located underground. And if we're doing it, obviously cities and governments and armies of the past were doing it also. But my question is what if we get down there? Is it because there's different places where, they kind of try to keep you out of exploring stuff. And the question is there other people or other beings that are already inhabiting lower levels of the earth? We know there's fresh water down there. There's ways for things to grow. And if you had a whole system set up of a subterranean world, you open a book up to a whole new idea of as above, so below, and who the mystery governments of the world may or may not be.
Marshall, Will, and Holly on a routine expedition. Imagine how that 1,000-foot below drop, what it would take you to the land of Sasquatch. Because you really got to wonder if those things have been inhabited for millions of years, we would not be welcome down there. And the deeper you go, the less welcome you become. You always got the ant people, though, because the Hopi always talk about the ant people coming out. So it's not the first time subterranean caverns are referenced or referred to with different civilizations with advanced technologies living under there. Remember, you wouldn't get reset as we're about to on the surface of the planet here. You could continue indefinitely with your society without being, if you got below the earthquake level, and who knows if the science is true. They tell us it gets really hot, but maybe you get through that heat barrier and then it cools back down in temperature. I mean, so much that, of what they told us the core was from when I was a kid to now has changed like 16 times of what it is.
And how would they really know, right? Because they've only...
Yeah, how do they know? I mean, what is really the science the deeper we go in the planet? And, you said keep these areas off limits and, don't let people explore. Those are called national parks. Because you can't even take a shovel in a national park. You can't look. You can't break through anything. You can't dig anything up. I mean, it's the perfect way to preserve something and not let any exploration go on. Like, look how much area of the world, or in the U.S. at least, is covered with national parks. Like half the country, you can't even do anything for exploration. And imagine the amount of underground cave systems that could be explored and found had we be able to go into national parks and look around. Oh, you're going to disturb the newt. Okay. But what if we don't disturb the newt? What if we find caves? Like here in East Tennessee, all the caves, they're all covered in. They're all covered with rebar and you can't go in them anymore. They covered up almost every single possible cave you can enter anywhere. And then if you're in the mountains, you're on private property, you're in a state park, you're in a national park, you can't go in those caves. You can't take the rebar off and go in those caves and look around. Not allowed. Oh, yeah, how dare you get off the trail? You can't go walk around up in the woods and look for that.
That's
so many restrictions on what the exploration could be in our own modern time, even though we have all these satellites and all these things.
What's down there? You brought up something, and I'm just going to leave you with this because I know we're running out of time. You pointed out that most of those places you can't really do anything or national forest, and that just also happens to be where people go missing the most bizarrely. And then I leave you with this thought: if you've seen The Time Machine, how there's another society of meat-eating people below the surface and a group of agrarian farmers above the surface doing what? They're making their self-nutritious so that something else has a better enjoyment in consuming them. Weird, huh? No, but that is weird. 411 missing people right in those national parks.
All right. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm David Dubine, your host, along with Ransom Godwin, 420 TV, Freedom is Films. Please remember, free speech is a #1 priority for us. Revolution Radio. Please consider becoming a patron, getting on the merch, direct donation, revolution.radio or freedomslips.com. Keep this type of venue on air so we can continue to bring you information for the mind to help you get ready. These changes are real. They're cyclical. We're back in one again. It's about you, your families, your communities, and keeping us all prepared as we march forward together to these changes. I appreciate listening, and we'll see you next Thursday. Bye for now.
Boom, shakalaka laka laka. All right, so that was tonight's David Dubine presentation from Ice Age Conversations. That's mini Ice Age Conversations. You can find the channel that is all mini Ice Age Conversations. Also Adapt 2030, and you can listen to the radio show unedited on freedomslips.com every Thursday at 10 o'clock Eastern Time, 9 o'clock Central, and 8 o'clock Mountain High Time. That's where I'm at. No, just kidding. But that's all I got for tonight. This has been 420 TV News. Thanks for watching. The time is now 4:20, and the weather is partly cloudy with a chance of an ice age. Just kidding. Anyway, peace out. And have a wonderful Thanksgiving. No, it's not really Thanksgiving. I'm just saying thanks for giving. I appreciate it. Somebody bought me a coffee the other day on Patreon. Well, I got paid the Patreon, so thank you guys for helping me hook up the coffee. Boo, boo, boo.
It's 11:59 at Radio Free America, and this is Uncle Sam with music and the truth until dawn. Right now, I got a few words for some of our brothers and sisters in the occupied zone. The chair is against the wall. The chair is against the wall. John has a long mustache. John has a long mustache. It's 12 o'clock, Americans, another day closer to victory. And for all of you out there on or behind the lines, this is your song.
This is a killer. This is a killer. This is a killer. Murder them. This is a killer. Murder them. This is a killer. Murder them. Yeah, we gon' murder them. Killer. This is a killer. Murder them. This is a killer. This is a
I just got one more thing. This is a message to all you guys on your YouTube and all of your places. I've totally decided to bend to your will. So here you go. Please, communism, please. Just put it right here, communism. Oh God, I'm so ready to submit. Just kidding. Communism's a killer. That was just a special treat for the last of you watching there. Adios, amigos.